of our friends, all of the community members, and I know there's even some alumni out there. I have given some of our alumni secret jobs, which let some of our members have candy at break. So it's good to come back. We want to start by acknowledging that we're so lucky to work and play on the unceded ancestral land of the Wet'suwet'en, and we're on the land of the Gidimt'en clan. We have had such a great year this year, learning a whole bunch of new tunes, bringing back some old tunes. We've had mentors from across Canada come and work with us, from Victoria, from Vancouver, from all over Ontario, and we have a great number of tunes to share with you. This is our 28th year-end concert, which I just calculated that, and it seems like a lot. Some things have changed since the beginning. There are more of us than there were in the beginning. We play more songs, but some things are a lot the same. We're still about community. We're about fun. We're about sharing music together and just having a lot of joy in all of that. We want to let you know that if you want to have some joy with us, there are ways you could do that. We have a fiddle camp this summer that you could come to at the end of August. You can play guitar, you can play piano, you can play fiddle, and it'll be out towards Houston at Rocknest Ranch. We have room for more people in VYF, which you might find a little bit hard to believe when you see all of us on the stage, but we always do. And we have things at the break that you can do to support us. We have a great concession. Our show tonight is called The Leaf, and we have some themed concession things, including themed leaves, cookies. We have leaves on our stage in case also. We also have some of our older stories, books from our older stories that are available for sale at break, that we would love if you picked up to help support us. All of the money that we make from the concert and from selling our things goes back to providing mentorship to all of the fiddlers. And so this, I feel, is going to be the best thing all of the whole weekend in Smithers. I know Tony Hawk was exciting for me. I didn't know who he was, and I know he was exciting, but I feel like this is going to be even more exciting for you. And you're in for a treat. One of our members, Patrick Williston, who's a great storyteller, is going to be out in a minute to just start telling you the story that goes with our show. So looking forward to hearing what you guys all think, and see you in just a few.
Rains like this, said his mother, and the drops are so big that you could see each one. I watched them hit the leaves, each strike causing a single leaf to flutter. And it kind of makes me think of a giant piano, each leaf a different note being played by a rain cloud. Nate looked up at the tree, The jet black branches suspended thousands of heart-shaped leaves. Each took a turn fluttering. Lemon lime leaves turning the color and marking the approach of winter. They would not be hanging on for much longer. And this made Nate gently sad. Nate and Annika, well, they were in the front yard. Leaves were falling from the big cottonwood tree one by one. "Let's try to catch them," said Annika. So that is what they did. Or at least that's what they tried to do. You see, it was much harder than it looked. The leaves seemed to sail through the air like perfectly balanced paper planes, but just when the leaves were about to land in their hands, they would dodge this way and that way, and they would evade capture. Craning their heads to the sky, Annika and Nate, they ran all over the yard trying to catch those leaves, shrieking with joy when one was finally caught. They spun in circles. They bumped into one another, and they leapt and they dove, and they generally had a pretty good time. "I love the leaf game," said Nate when he was catching his breath. "I do too," said Annika. When they were too tired to try for any more leaves, Annika having caught 4 and Nate 2, they lay on their backs and waited to see if the leaves would simply just fall on them, cover them right up. I don't want them all to fall, said Annika. I'm not ready yet. Maybe I could use my drone and put them back up on the tree, said Nate. Take too long, said Annika. Yeah, I guess so, agreed Nate. After all, there was no easy way to reattach the leaves, and the risk of a collision with the tree, well, that was more like a certainty. And the drone battery only lasted around 15 minutes anyway. Just then, a big leaf spiraled down and landed on Nate. Oof, said Nate. Lucky, said Annika. What if they don't come back next year, said Nate. You mean the leaves, said Annika. Yeah, the leaves, said Nate. That, said Annika, that would be very bad. A big gust of wind bent the trees over their heads, and 1,000 leaves took flight like a flock of yellow birds. his mother, they went for a walk down by the creek. The huge devil's club leaves had turned gold, and the dogwood leaves crimson. The path was paved in birch leaves, now bright yellow, but the cottonwoods, they were nearly leafless by then. Nate looked to the top of the very tallest cottonwood, a big old tree that was nearly as wide as a car. Way out on the end of a high branch, Nate spied a single leaf. So there it was, just a single leaf up in the top of the tree. I am just a simple leaf, said the leaf, to no one in particular. I am one of 50,000 leaves that once crowded this great big old tree, waving in the wind, rinsed by rain, warmed by the sun. I've been surrounded by bird song. I've been tickled by the tiny feet of mosquitoes. But I'm just a leaf, and it's time for me to go. I know this may sound a bit crazy, said the leaf, but all my life I wanted to be something else. I wanted to be something big and daring and dangerous. Well, when it comes right down to it, I wanted to be a killer whale. An orca. You know what? I'm not complaining, said the leaf. Life as a leaf has been good. The views, the friendships, but I've always imagined life as a killer whale, slashing through the waves, weaving through kelp forests, hunting for fish to eat, a powerful and graceful predator of the sea. And here I am, a leaf on the end of a branch, pausing at the very moment of letting go and to briefly fly through the air before landing on the ground somewhere and turning brown, growing mold, getting devoured by mites and snails and creatures that are not so very big or bold or dangerous. And with that soliloquy, the leaf, well, it leapt from the branch. It was a graceful leap, very graceful, if the truth be told. Single lone leaf had chosen that very moment to let go. The leaf wobbled from side to side for a moment before finding balance. Perfectly tuned for flight, the leaf made a broadening spiral, gliding through the sky like a kite without a string. The leaf, it spiraled gracefully in the sky like a hawk riding a current of warm air. How did that leaf know how to fly so well, wondered Nate. A final banking turn took the leaf toward the creek where it briefly skimmed the surface and then settled in a small pool. The leaf spun several times around in the pool in a current, and then it disappeared downstream. That little leaf traveled its way down the stream, spinning off cobbles and swirling around through small pools, splashing down riffles, and eventually shooting out of the creek and into the big river, a river so wide that the far shore was more of an idea than anything else. Recent rains had given the big river a sense of urgency. It was in a hurry to get somewhere, to head west through the rugged mountains. The leaf suddenly found itself speeding toward the coast, and it was not possible to suppress a feeling of wonder and excitement. take a little intermission right now. We welcome you to... Yes, I'm right there. Okay, great. We welcome you to join us in the foyer for refreshments, and we'll be right back here in about 15 minutes. And so it was, that little leaf found itself on a rapid chase down the big river, weaving through the great coastal mountains. After a few hectic days, swirling around in that big murky water, the pace of the river eased, and the river channels became braided. The leaf went this way and that, here close to the right bank, here in the middle branch, and here left. Then the river took on a surging pulse, the influence of the tides, pushing and pulling from the river mouth. Just when the leaf thought it might have caught the subtle taste of salt, it was swept into a small channel where a spruce tree had fallen into the water. The edge of the leaf caught up on a small branch, and the flow of the river quickly wrapped the leaf tightly around the branch, and there was really no way to get free. And that's just the way things go sometimes. We get so close to reaching our goals, and something beyond our control, it blocks the path. So it was with the leaf, stuck there on a spruce twig in the big river about 30 kilometers from the ocean where the killer whales hunted. and then weeks. The leaf turned brown and began to break up a little bit. A caddisfly, an aquatic bug wrapped in a cloak made of grains of sand, came crawling along that branch that was held under the water. The caddisfly was looking for something to eat and was delighted to find the softened leaf caught on the spruce branch, a perfect snack after a long walk. The caddisfly peacefully chewed the leaf, starting at one end and gradually working toward the other, gnawing that little leaf down to the bones, the fibrous veins that ran the length of the leaf. As the caddisfly reflected about what a truly delicious leaf it was, well, a young salmon happened to be swimming by, and it saw the contented caddisfly, and, well, it gobbled him up without a moment's thought. Instinct, I suppose, swimmy swim. Hey, a bug, gobble, gobble, swimmy swim. And the leaf eater was eaten. The tide had just turned, and the young salmon rode that big brown river, a great conveyor, all the way down to the ocean. There, among the eelgrass beds of the estuary, the salmon found companions and a great many small crabs and snails to eat. The salmon stayed in the estuary for several weeks, adjusting to the salt sea, broadening its horizon day by day, until it found itself beyond the plume of the river silt and into the clear blue ocean. It was a vast and enticing seascape of swaying kelp and brightly colored animals of all shapes and sizes. Orange sea stars, not bad. Red rock crabs, delicious. Transparent jellies, no real flavor there. And deep green sea cucumbers, best avoided. Mesmerized by the diversity and the abundance, the cracks, the caves, the canyons, the ever-changing currents, the tidal rapids, that young salmon was not world-wise. And so it was that the salmon strayed onto an oceanic highway, a route well known to the fin fish born of the salt sea, and I'm afraid to report it ended up in the belly of a killer whale. A sleek black tornado that snatched the salmon while stunned in a moment of wide-eyed wonder. that shining black orca plied the waters for 25 years. She gave birth to 5 calves during that time, swam as far as Kamchatka, and lived a long and fulfilling life in her North Pacific playground. And somewhere in that big, beautiful whale, the proteins of a small salmon, a contented caddisfly, and the dreams and the aspirations, the vitamins, the minerals of a humble cottonwood leaf. A small leaf with big dreams transformed into an orca by way of a circuitous path with a couple of unexpected twists and turns. And here we are now, here we are in spring, a time that is marked by the return of the sandhill cranes and the songbirds, and importantly, the return of the leaves. Yes, if only to allay Nate and Annika's fears, the leaves, they have returned. They're just now crowding the branches of every single shrub and every tree. They are pushing up through the soil and growing more than a centimeter each and every day. See, said Annika. Told you they'd come back. The maple leaves had a sweetness to them that Nate claimed he could taste with his tongue. You're weird, said Annika. No, you should try it. I'm not kidding, said Nate. I see what you mean, said Annika. Cottonwood buds smelling like some kind of perfume stuck to their bare feet. Birds were moving through the valley, and the swallows, they were chipping at one another, arguing over the best spot to build their nests. The days had grown so long that it seemed the sun would never set. Annika gave Nate a handful of small arrowhead-shaped leaves. Sorrel, you can eat these ones, see? She said, chewing on a few of the leaves. Nate put one in his mouth. Wow, they're sour. Yeah, but they're kind of good, right? Kinda, said Nate. It's got vitamin C. It'll prevent scurvy, said Annika. You know, like if you get shipwrecked or something. That's good to know, said Nate. that these shrubs and these trees can go from bare to fully clothed in the span of a few short weeks? How is that even possible? To grow this incredible mass of foliage seemingly overnight, a miraculous explosion of life, cell division in hyperdrive, a trillion light catchers bursting from every branch, the sky suddenly filled with them. Well, mustn't it hurt to grow leaves so quickly? At this time of year, the new leaves, they glow as if they themselves are sources of light, as if night will come and the land will stay lit by the radiant energy of unrestrained growth and newness. And who knows what aspirations each leaf might harbor. This one, a teacher. This one, a boa constrictor. This one, a mushroom. This one, a killer whale. And this one, a fiddle player. Dream big, little leaf. Dream big. Who's to say where you might fly to?